choice voting. Yeah. When it comes down to second and third place votes, that's going to decide who's going to win. I mean, really? Alaskans want Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi?
New tonight, Sarah Palin has failed at her most recent attempt at a political comeback. She lost the special election for a vacant House seat in Alaska. That seat is now flipping to a Democrat for the first time since 1972.
We have just begun, and it's a fight for what is right for Alaska and for our nation. And I do repeat that you don't need a title, you don't need an office to make a difference. So we're going to get out there using whatever tools and forums and formats that we have to fight for what's right.
Republican Sarah Palin loses her congressional bid in Alaska. So of course, Republicans are now blaming their loss on the system. I'm Yasmin Khan with Rebel HQ, and Alaska is one of only 2 states that have wholly adopted ranked choice voting as their election voting model. Other states use it, but as far as full statewide adoption, Alaska and Maine are the only 2. Now, there has been a huge push for more states and counties to adopt ranked choice voting, a push that's picked up steam and interest over the past several years, and for good reason. The 2-party electoral system we've got is bunk. So short of scrapping the whole thing and just starting over, ranked choice voting offers a way to achieve a more representative election result within the current system. And that's what Republicans are mad about, the representative part. In the recent Alaska special election, Democrat Mary Peltola defeated Republican Sarah Palin, flipping a seat that had been reliably red for nearly 50 years. Alaska adopted ranked choice voting in 2020, so this is the first time the state has actually used the system. Predictably, Republicans are now calling the election rigged, because that's just what they do now. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton tweeted that ranked choice voting is, quote, a scam to rig elections. And he went on to tweet, quote, 60% of Alaska voters voted for a Republican, but thanks to a convoluted process and ballot exhaustion, which disenfranchises voters, a Democrat won. First of all, the current electoral system is already convoluted, clunky, imperfect, and not always representative. But it's especially interesting that a Republican is complaining about voters being disenfranchised. For decades, Republicans have relied on gaming the 2-party electoral system in order for them to win elections, with the 2 most recent Republican presidents winning their elections despite the Democratic candidate actually winning the popular vote. Even more recently, we've seen an incumbent Republican president attempting to steal an election win, literally, by attempting to use a fake docket of electors and asking states to find him more votes or to throw out votes for his opponent. Beyond that, we have rampant redistricting and gerrymandering, which both parties are guilty of. But the Republicans are taking it one step further by using district maps in 4 states that were ruled to have been illegally gerrymandered in upcoming elections.
Choice voting. Yeah. When it comes down to second and third place votes, that's going to decide who's going to win. I mean, really? Alaskans want Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi?
When Sarah Palin heard she'd lost her election, she asked, I mean, really? Alaskans want Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi? It's particularly funny that she mentioned Joe Biden, even though he wasn't her opponent in this race, because this isn't actually the first time that Americans have chosen Joe Biden over Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin's congressional bid was her attempt to make a big political comeback, a comeback that I can't imagine anyone was actually asking for, seeing the Trump era as her moment to shine, and in some ways, it's not surprising that she would think that. Sarah Palin was sort of ahead of her time as far as pushing the ridiculousness of the Republican Party into the forefront of American politics. She came to national prominence back in 2008 when the then governor of Alaska was announced as John McCain's running mate in the presidential race against Barack Obama and Joe Biden. During the election, her teenage daughter got pregnant, obviously out of wedlock. As an outspoken, anti-choice, God-fearing woman, Bristol Palin's pregnancy was seen as a liability to her mother's campaign. So before the pregnancy was announced, Bristol got engaged to her baby's father. Bristol went on to do Dancing with the Stars, and she placed 3rd in the competition, despite getting consistently low scores throughout the season, raising questions of voting integrity within the Dancing with the Stars voting system. Seriously. After that, Bristol became a public speaker advocating for abstinence education in schools. But back to Sarah, her daughter's personal drama fueled salacious headlines in the press for a while, most of them regarding the hypocrisy around her big talk of strong family values and her family's Christian-based moral and ethical code, etc. But she made a lot of unsavory headlines all on her own. She was saying some crazy things on the campaign trail, things that people probably wouldn't flinch at these days because the bar for political candidates has fallen so incredibly low. But back in 2008, Sarah Palin was wild. For example, she asked why scientists were given money to study fruit flies, without identifying what those scientists were actually studying. And this was shocking, because a political figure was basically disparaging public funding for education and scientific achievement. Today, that's practically a part of the Republican platform. When asked about her foreign policy experience, she famously said, "I can see Russia from my house." Not even 8 years of George W. Bush had really prepared us for a vice presidential candidate who offered answers like that to real questions about real topics from real journalists. Tina Fey, who was a cast member on SNL at the time, did an impression of Sarah Palin that launched her into the spotlight, where she basically just repeated things the real Sarah Palin had already said. Sarah's own quotes were outlandish enough for SNL. Now, once the 2008 election wrapped, Obama and Biden went off to the White House, and Sarah more or less faded from headlines, at least political headlines. She ventured into the world of reality television following the election, just as other notable Republican figures have done, like Donald Trump and DJ Pauly D. And most recently, she stepped back into the political sphere after years away when the Republican Party had devolved to the point that the aforementioned reality star Donald Trump had become its de facto leader. Now, I won't get into details about how ranked choice voting works, and I imagine most of you are probably already familiar with the concept, but basically, it sort of sidesteps the two-party system in a way that is actually more representative of the will of the people. It's not perfect, but it's much better than the system we're currently working with, where voters are given a binary choice between two candidates, which usually just leaves voters to choose the lesser of two evils. With the current system, there are plenty of opportunities for improvement. For instance, independent candidates are often demonized for essentially siphoning votes away from the candidate that's more likely to win, which can result sometimes in the opposing candidate from the less popular party actually winning the election. So people tend to vote for the non-independent candidate as a matter of democratic strategy. But all that does is more deeply entrench ourselves within the two-party system. Think of the debate surrounding the vote blue no matter who movement versus Bernie or bust. The current structure doesn't allow for independent candidates to realistically get any of their ideas, which may have considerable public support, into government. And it results in the two parties becoming more and more polarized in their attempts to covet votes. If you take the Republican Party, for example, the 2016 presidential election saw Republicans who weren't supportive of Donald Trump voting for him because they didn't want to vote for the Democrat. It was all or nothing, Trump or nothing. Their only other option was to just not vote. When votes inevitably come in for candidates like Donald Trump, the whole party shifts further to the right to accommodate the candidate who, it would appear, has large public support. The reality, however, might actually be that swaths of Republican voters didn't like or support Trump. They just weren't given any other options once their preferred candidates were out of the race. To extrapolate that even further, it's sort of a media effect, where the most raucous and inflammatory characters get the most media attention. And even if that's negative media attention, it still works to drive ad revenue, which leads media outlets to infer that this is the sort of stuff that people actually want, so we get more of the thing that we don't want or need. In a ranked choice system, voters have the option to say, I prefer this candidate, but I'd also be okay with this other candidate. Taking the Democrats as an example now, ranked choice voting would have come in clutch when it was Bernie versus Hillary, and then Bernie versus Joe. Many Democratic voters had to choose between the candidate that they actually wanted to win and the candidate most likely to win, because the alternative, Donald Trump, was simply unacceptable. So, long story short, Republicans will blame their election losses on everything, except for the possibility that the candidates their party puts forth are barely intelligible and that their party platform is regressive, discriminatory, and wildly unpopular. And for the record, a recent poll found that amongst 23 potential presidential candidates in the 2024 election, Bernie Sanders was the most preferred candidate between both parties, more popular than Trump and more popular than Biden. All right, that's it for me. Please like and subscribe if you got something out of this, and be sure to follow me over on Instagram and TikTok. Thanks for being here.